We have no alternative but to keep moving with determination. We've gone too far now to turn back. And in a real sense, we are moving and we cannot afford to stop.
Welcome to the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Redeeming the Prophetic Vision Interfaith Community Service. I welcome you on behalf of The Conversation. The Conversation is a grassroots social justice community who have been gathering every Sunday since 2006, when it started as a book study of Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Why We Can't Wait. The Conversation is committed to building diverse, critically engaged communities of justice. We promote social justice through ideas, ideals, and action. Our goal is to model a just, open, compassionate community. Our foundational principle is justice for all. We are a family, an affinity group, a think tank, and a safe house. We envision a world free of racism, mistrust, and intentional harm. This is the 15th year of the Martin Luther King Jr. Redeeming the Prophetic Vision Interfaith Service. Since its inception, our mission is to recapture, reinvigorate, and redeem the prophetic vision of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We want to present his vision with its sharp, searing insight with the context of everyday life, in contrast to what we see as an ongoing effort to render it as benign, anemic, antiseptic, elusive, and static. We want to bring it back to the streets, to the people, where it started, where it belongs. And thus, the Conversation, in partnership with Associated Ministries and Urban Grace Church, welcome you here today.
We begin this time together with a heartfelt acknowledgement of the Puyallup Nation on whose land we live. Despite being the targets of invasion, occupation, and displacement leading to centuries of trauma, the Native peoples here in Tacoma, Pierce County, Washington, and across the country have extended to us the courtesy of a welcome to their home. We are guests and beneficiaries of this welcome. Through this acknowledgement, we signal our participation in the necessary project of reimagining the social contracts between Native people and the rest of us, who have shown up through different routes to these Native nations. Our solidarity is with Native people in their efforts to end generations of historical trauma. In Tacoma, Pierce County, we breathe in the beauty of these settings beside the Salish Sea. And as guests, we appreciate the opportunity for learning and growth, with an awareness of the living heritage of the land on which we live. Our foundational principle is justice for all. Where there's injustice, there is no peace. No justice, no peace.
I want to say good morning. We are here on Theophos Waterway, and I chose this site because just across the waterway is the original mouth of the Puyallup River. Our people have been here, lived here along the Puyallup River, underneath our beautiful, beautiful sacred mountain since the beginning of time. Our people have always acknowledged our sacred mountain, our water, this land, our salmon, our deer, our plants, our berries. We always give thanks to the first foods that this Mother Earth has given to us. We are at a time today where we have just moved through the winter solstice, the beginning of the new year, and a time of renewal and time of sharing stories, and the time of new beginnings. Many of us feel that relief and that we feel like we can let our shoulders drop just a bit. Take in the sunshine today. Take in the gift and what this sacred water has to give to us. Our water is a sacred gift for healing, for taking care of our bodies, for welcoming this new life that's going to come into this Mother Earth, for welcoming our people to take this time and move forward, to give thanks for the many blessings that we received, to be able to hold ourselves in honor, to grieve at the loss of our people, the loss of this time, but also to give thanks for our children, for the future, to where we're going. And we have many opportunities to move forward, because all of these gifts have been given by the Creator as a way to help us survive. We have been given resilience. We have been given the strength to look back at our history, and we have been given those guidance and directions of tradition and ceremony and a way of life to remember our families, our children, our friends, our relatives, our communities, and honor them, uplift them, and say good morning and thank you. All my relations.
My name is Bruce Cadden. I'm Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth El in Tacoma. This past June, I shared these words with my congregation following the murders of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Emmanuel Ellis here in Tacoma. How can it be that 6 years after the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, 8 years after the murder of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, 56 years since the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 158 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and 401 years since the first slaves were brought to these shores, we are still experiencing the results of embedded hatred and systematic racism. How can it be? And we were once again reminded of the hatred, the racism that exists in this country by the heinous attack on our capital. Now more than ever, we need to heed the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So let us pray. Loving God, be with us at this time. Help us to work together to truly embrace each other, to address the deep-seated racism in our country. Inspire us by the message of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And be with us as we help create a peaceful and just society. Amen.
Tacoma forcefully calling for the officers involved in the death of Manny Ellis to be fired.
The sheriff's office says Ellis flagged down Tacoma police for help after trying to open car doors. They say he then assaulted an officer. Ellis's death was ruled a homicide. The report found he died of respiratory arrest due to hypoxia because of physical restraint. Investigators say at one point Ellis told officers he couldn't breathe.
The officer's actions we saw on this video tonight only confirm that Manuel Ellis's death was a homicide.
It's time for us to say to these men that if you don't do something about it, we will have no alternative.
Lapse. Been fighting with our fists up. Generational trauma won't let up. Flower bats, hot tea, ain't self-care for the dehumanized, you see. Subliminal messages, yes, here, evergreen trees. Still gotta carry batons, labor, perform in a stomach that only weeps. Self-care, how do we take care? Those who care, take care. Fear rolling in armpits, exhaling, never a choice. Oppression in subconscious, an ocean forever lost in. Flower bats, hot tea, ain't self-care for the dehumanized, you see. Will you speak tongue to rhythm? Does your heart even make a beat for black and brown and in between? You can name streets on fire, but can't name yourself. You can name streets on fire, but can't name trauma. Flower bats, hot tea, ain't self-care for the dehumanized, you see. No grandfather's cabin for me to retreat. No lounge chair for daisies to engulf me. Our knuckles been swollen. Awareness, your privilege. trying to live as our existence, while your hands submerge in bubble baths and your knees shake from yoga poses. Flower baths, hot tea ain't self-care for the dehumanized, you see. Freedom will come from those who put awareness to action, make living a sanction. We are defining the times we are living in.
Let your heart, let your heart burn. 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 With love, 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 loving kindness. With love, 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 loving kindness. For all who may cross your path. For all who may cross your path. Let your heart, let your heart burn. Let your heart, let your heart burn. With love, 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 loving kindness. With love, 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 loving kindness. Burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path.
Anybody want to do by themselves? Tony, do by yourself. We'll do the motions, you do the words, okay?
I know the motions, I just know the words.
Okay.
Let your heart burn with loving kindness for whoever may cross your path.
Nice. Anybody else want to take over?
Let your heart, let your heart burn. Let your heart, let your heart burn. With love, 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 loving kindness. With love, 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 loving kindness.
For all who may cross your path. For all who may cross your path. For all who may cross your path. For all who may cross your path.
Let your heart, burn.
Let your heart, let your heart burn. With love, 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 loving kindness. With love, 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 loving kindness.
Let your heart, let your heart burn.
True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Stride Toward Freedom, 1958.
1844. Bennett Barrow strolls around his Highland plantation in slave quarters with Casey, his lawyer cousin from Massachusetts. He stops and points to the quarters where captive Black people live and breathe. Don't let anybody fool you. This is the nucleus of the whole operation. The plantation revolves around this. In 1837, I had them wrapping paper around corn seed. I had them grafting pear trees and peach trees and apple trees. I tried this method and that method for ridding my fields of squirrels and raccoons. None of that compared to what I truly needed to study. None of that business held a candle to the profitable remuneration I received from putting my attention on them. I set out to study and thereby improve the mechanical working habits of my niggers. I have to know them, know how they do. I'm the master of them. I have to be interested in what they do and how they do it. You see, I'm the impelling force. One of the reasons for wanting to explore Louisiana's Civil War history and its Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction aftermath is that I could do it through tracing West Feliciana relatives who lived through those times. It would be their lens through which the story was told. West Feliciana Parish was heavily laden with sugar and cotton plantations. Enslaved Black people were transported to West Feliciana Parish from as far away as Virginia once the Atlantic enslaved trade ceased. Some of those people were walked to Louisiana from Virginia, some with coffles around their necks, their hands, their legs, their feet. Some of those people were my people. I have lived to tell about it.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Letter from Birmingham Jail, April 16th, 1963.
2017, the Tacoma Hospital. Clarissa sits in a chair in the chemo unit. She is being hooked up to a chemo machine by a white nurse. Clarissa has made a makeshift desk on a small rollaway platform. She's reading papers spread before her. The nurse finishes the hookup and turns to her stand-up computer. Have you been out of the country in the last month? No. Have you had any falls? No. Are there any changes to your medication? No. Great. You're all set. Thank you. What you got there? What's all that? The nurse goes in closer to take a look. It's my project, my Louisiana project. The nurse grabs one of the papers and tries to read it. Clarissa tries to retrieve it, but is tethered to her chair. This is some old handwriting. I can hardly read it. That's about my great uncle's service in the Civil War. He was a corporal. The nurse squints. Clarissa continues. He literally dropped everything, ran away from the plantation to join the army. He was 17 years old. His name is emblazoned on a statue in Washington, D.C., commemorating the so-called colored infantry. The nurse puts the paper down. My husband and I love to visit all the monuments. We were in Richmond, Virginia, the Avenue of the Monuments. It is so beautiful. Clarissa says, my ancestor was a Union soldier. The nurse, I'm just saying that I don't understand why they want us to get rid of our history. That's our history. Clarissa's stunned, tries to hide it. I don't think anyone is trying to get rid of history. Oh, yes, they are. Everywhere you look, they're tearing down our history. That's American history, and it's just not right. Clarissa says the Confederacy was defeated. They lost. It's still our history. That avenue is beautiful. Why destroy that? Clarissa picks up the paper the nurse is trying to read. People like my uncle fought and died to be free. They were enslaved. They had no life, no liberty, no freedom, except that was given them by the people who enslaved them. The South lost. Who gets to have monuments when they lose? That's not how it goes. Museums can house the Confederate memorabilia. Memorabilia, it's not just tokens, it's our history. And it's just too much. I mean, we can't even say the N-word. Wait, what? The N-word? What are you talking about? I thought we were talking about Confederate monuments. It's all just one ball of wax. No, it's not one ball of wax. And why on earth would you want to say the N-word? I'm not saying that I do. I'm just saying that it's all so confusing. I mean, these days, people are so confusing. People should be able to honor their ancestors who fought and died for this country. Clarissa shakes her head in disbelief as the nurse leaves, words trailing, indecipherable.
The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Strength to Love, 1963.
This is a summary of the testimony of Black men, Black Republican voters in West Feliciana Parish in the 1876 presidential election. The U.S. Senate held hearings to talk about intimidation to include threats of and actual carrying out of deaths to Black men who voted the Republican Party. The Committee of Safety compelled to become Democratic. J.N. Morgan of the 4th Ward testifies, in the autumn of 1875, a Committee of Safety was formed. Charles Barrow, president. Colored men were asked to sign the rolls, were told they could vote as they liked, as it was a non-political organization. Nearly all the colored men joined it. In June 1876, however, a resolution was introduced binding the club to vote the Democratic ticket. Mr. Barrow said they must do that because the people of the parish were tired of the damned radical nigger rule. And the state must go Democratic if they had to kill all the damn radical niggers. He thereupon declared the resolution adopted. I, among the rest, being afraid to make any objection. At the next meeting, but few colored men attended, and soon after, the bulldozers began to visit and threaten us. I and many other Negroes of the 4th Ward began to sleep in the woods for fear of being killed. During the months of July, August, and September, our fears were greatly increased by the murder of Gilbert Carter, Isaac Mitchell, and Edward Armstrong, who lived near me, and by hearing that Primus Pickett, Jupiter Johns, and others had been shot at, and Brent Laws and March Gray and others had been seized and whipped. I recognized among the armbands of white men, residents of my neighborhood, Court Smith and Charles Barrows. After repeated warnings, I joined the Democratic Club and attended the meetings and Democratic speakings. These acts of violence caused many colored voters to stay away from the polls, and many others were compelled to vote the Democratic ticket. Before the election, we were told that all those who voted the Republican ticket would be spotted. And on election day, there was a man at the polls with a spot book, and he called out the names of each man who voted the Republican ticket and said, spotted. I saw many colored men who came to the polls with Republican tickets drop them when they heard this man call out the names. Some left the polls without voting. Others were accosted by the Democrats and compelled to vote the Democratic ticket. Many of these last came to me and said they were afraid to vote as they wanted to. If there had been a free and fair vote, the Republicans would have carried the 4th Ward by a majority of about 250. As it was, the Democrats carried it by nearly 70 majority. George A. Swayze corroborates the leading facts stated above. William Jones corroborates the above story of the club, says the resolution of the Committee of Safety that vote the Democratic ticket was introduced by Courtney Smith sometime in June 1876. After that, Courtney Smith, James Stewart, and other leading members of the club acted with the bulldozers and visited the Negro members to compel them to attend. They took a colored man on Mr. Grover's place and whipped him severely, telling him they would visit him again if he failed to attend the club. Republican voters discharged from employment for voting Republican ticket or for refusing to vote the Democratic ticket. William Butler, Andrew Jackson, Harrison Douglas, Alfred Morgan, and James Williams swear that they were laborers employed by Dr. William Ball on the 7th of November last, that they attempted to vote the Republican ticket on that day in the 2nd Ward, and in consequence thereof, were discharged from employment, driven from the parish, and their goods, furniture, and bedclothes were hauled to the riverbank where they now lie without shelter, and that Ball is still indebted to them and refuses to settle because they attempted to vote the Republican ticket. Ferensky of Bayou Sarah corroborates the story. C.M. Lewis, commissioner of 7th Ward, saw a number of white men leading colored men up to the polls at the last election and tell them unless they voted the Democratic ticket, they would discharge them and they could not be employed in the entire parish. Witness was discharged by William Hamrick from work at his sawmill because he would not vote the Democratic ticket. George A.W. Swayze of Bayou Sarah swears he has seen armed bands of Democrats riding in and out of town, and when in the country have been told by them that it was their business to make the damn niggers vote the Democratic ticket, that this was a white man's country and the radical niggers should not hold office anymore. If you're wondering what has happened to the progeny, to the great-grandchildren, the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren of these Democratic men from 1876. If you were watching January 6th last week, you saw some of them there. But they're not just in Washington, D.C. marching. They live among us. They work among us. In honor of my ancestors, it is my duty to tell their story. Thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Eve Bowen, and it's my honor once again to introduce this year's Social Justice honorees. For background, each year we recognize outstanding individuals from our South Sound community who have worked tirelessly to promote the human rights of all people. In recognition of their work, we induct these honorees into the Redeeming the Prophetic Vision Social Justice Awards honor roll. This award was established by the conversation as part of our mission of promoting social justice through ideas, ideals, and action. They each have helped all of us envision a world free of racism, mistrust, and intentional harm. Each honoree will receive a beautifully designed plaque as well as a creation by our very own Hilltop artists. Their names will be called. Thank you.
2021 Social Justice Honoree, Ginny Parham. Ginny Parham lives and breathes criminal justice reform. Through her journey of supporting her son, who is incarcerated at only 18 years old, Ginny has worked tirelessly to reduce sentences for young men who enter the penal system early in their lives. Ginny formed the nonprofit called Families Shoulder to Shoulder, which supports individuals going to court. Ginny organizes people to show up at court hearings and write letters that show the transformation of people for whom she is advocating. This has led to reduced sentences as judges are shown how the individual has demonstrated personal growth and also demonstrated that there is a support network for that individual when leaving prison early. Ginny's advocacy is multifaceted, from supporting individuals and their families to institutional criminal justice reform.
2021 Social Justice Honoree, Kamanti Carter. Kamanti Carter engages in transformative work among inmates in Washington state prisons, and he has done so from the inside as an incarcerated individual. Upon learning that Washington state barred the use of tax money for degree-earning higher educational opportunities in prison, Kamanti started TEACH, or Taking Education and Creating History, in 2013 at Clallam Bay Corrections Center, so incarcerated people could fill that gap themselves. TEACH is a 4-credit program that teaches college courses in liberal arts, supported by donations and volunteers under the leadership of incarcerated people. It has now expanded to several prisons. Kamanti's leadership has impacted individuals within the system and is having long-term impact on criminal justice reform. In the film, Since I've Been Down, Kamanti said, "Prisons can be deeply segregated by race, but at TEACH, everyone learns together." Kamanti continues to educate us all, inside and outside of prison walls, and reminds us of our humanity.
2021 Social Justice Honoree, Martha Kerwin. Martha Kerwin heard Dr. Martin Luther King's radical call for peace and justice, and she answered. Martha has dedicated her life to positively affecting the fundamental nature of the lives of Washington residents. From hot meals to groceries to clothing, tens of thousands of community members have been impacted by Martha's work during her 19 years as executive director of the My Sister's Pantry Food Bank in Tacoma. Martha's approach is squarely focused on dignity, honoring diversity, and the notion that everyone should have fundamental rights to food and clothing. Martha is described as having radical empathy that brings people full circle, from being consumers of services to becoming the volunteers and donors to support those services.
2021 Social Justice Honoree, Peace Lutheran Community Church. Peace Lutheran Community Church, located in the Hilltop neighborhood of Tacoma, was established in 1909 and has been a beacon of social justice for decades. Peace Lutheran Community Church has community educational programs, including its Hilltop Scholars Program, which involves individual academic coaching for students in grades 2 through 12 at McCarver Elementary, Jason Lee Middle School, and other on-site tutoring for high school students. In recent years, the church ministry has purchased 3 homes and offers affordable housing for families. Peace Lutheran also supports community with its regularly scheduled hot meal programs. And most recently, Peace Lutheran Community Church hosts gatherings with other congregations to discuss race.
2021 Social Justice Honoree, Tanya Wilson. Tanya was the founding member of the Women's Village at Purdy Correction Center. Before the creation of the Women's Village, Purdy Correction Center was one of the most violent prisons in Washington state. But that violence went down by 50% from the work of Tanya and the Women's Village. In the film titled Since I've Been Down, Tanya said, "People have to be willing to put the effort to see incarcerated people as human, which can be daunting, it can be frustrating, it can be scary. The ability and the willingness and the actual action of hearing and listening deeply, it means you are willing to be changed in a fundamental way." Since being released, Tanya continues to lead and impact communities inside and outside of prison walls as a reentry outreach coordinator for the Freedom Education Project, the same project from which Tanya, in 2017, was valedictorian when she earned her college degree while still incarcerated. Tanya's leadership in organizing with ethics created lasting positive impacts for incarcerated individuals and institutional criminal justice reform. 2021 Social Justice Honoree, Inaugural Inspirational Recognition, Mariah LaPointe Stafford. Mariah LaPointe Stafford is a current and future voice of activism in our Tacoma-Pierce County community and beyond. Mariah is Hunkpapa Lakota from the Standing Rock, Sitting Bull's people. Mariah speaks out on issues impacting Indigenous communities, including but not limited to missing and murdered Indigenous people, representation in history lessons and drama, the LNG facility in Tacoma, and the climate crisis. Mariah, at only 11 years old, brings perspective and youth voice to the work of justice while honoring her history, culture, and the ancestral lands we all occupy.
Soy The real cost of change is high. Joel Workin, one of the prophets and saints in the Lutheran Church in the movements for inclusion and affirmation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus children of God, knew this cost. Joel talks about the real cost, the high cost of putting your body, your life, your reputation on the line for justice. In the Christian tradition, we might call this the way of the cross. But then Joel asks the question, what about the cost of the closet, of silence, of shame, of running from God? What about the cost to community? He writes, let no one think the choice is between paying the price or not paying the price. In other words, there's always a cost, but which cost are we willing to pay? There is a cost to examining the ways we are complicit with white supremacy, a cost to interrupting oppression, a cost to using our voice, and there is a cost to our silence, to cheap change, to limited reforms, to hiding behind privilege. It's a cost that harms our souls, negates our neighbors, and that leads to death for people of color and destroys us all. Which cost are we willing to pay? With the prophetic witness of Martin and Joel guiding us, I offer this prayer. God, you who desire peace with justice for all, for Christians, you are made known in the person of Jesus, whose commitment to your vision cost him everything. You continue to speak through prophets like Martin and Joel and others who follow paths that come with great cost. On days when the cost of daily life already seems so high, remind us that you are our eternal source of renewed hope and that the cost of following you can transform our communities. God, you call us to the hard and life-giving work of racial justice. May we also see that you set a vision before us that inspires each step, and that you take this journey with us in love. Amen.
In this our 15th year of collaborating with the Urban Grace Church and with associated ministries to bring to our community this Redeeming the Prophetic Vision Interfaith event, we seek to reimagine unity across difference, to renew our shared commitment to the path of social justice, and reconnect with peace and justice activists and advocates across our communities. As we do so, the conversation, an all-volunteer group, wishes to thank all participants and supporters and to congratulate social justice awardees. Thanks to our stellar planning team and to everyone on our program. Thanks Tom Hawthorne, Eve Bowen, Gina De Silva, Tina McLeod, Sonny Morgan, Barb Church, Aneda Arnold, Calista Brown, Norma Ramirez, Diana Owens, Mona Baghdadi, David Lambert, Janine Provozek, and Monty Smith. And a special thanks to our Videotech editor specialist, Janelle Gordon. As I consider the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the place of the nation's capital, and the role of Black women as part of my reflection on recent events, and as I ponder our prospects up ahead, it is clear to me that it is urgent that we change the nation and that we change it now. I am convinced of this, and I invite you to join me to make this change. And here is why. The change is necessary, I believe, because one, the Black prophetic vision demands it. Two, the Black experience demonstrates the need for it. And three, the Black women of America show that we can deliver it. Demanding change. Among the early voices in America to speak truth to power, since as early as 1798 and through the 1800s, were Black voices. These voices have challenged America to live up to its creed. New York Times journalists and founder of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, writes that our founding ideals of liberty and equality were false when they were written. Black Americans fought to make them true. Without this struggle, America would have no democracy at all. Martin Luther King Jr. comes from this long line of voices we identify as offering a Black prophetic vision. Looking out over the vast gathering of an estimated 250,000 people from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the same site where the invasion took place recently, and encouraged by Mahalia Jackson, who had just thrilled the crowd, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. declared, "We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment." The moment was 1963, with the nation preparing to celebrate 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation. Celebration plans that highlighted the fact that Black people had waited more than 250 years for freedom and another 100 years for equality, and neither had been achieved. The nation had promised but had not delivered. The urgency was that after its first two violent revolutions, the nation was facing its third. This third revolution, Dr. King noted, would likely come from Black Americans, the nation's disenchanted, disadvantaged, and disinherited. Inferior education, excluded from economic opportunities, exploited and disenfranchised politically by Republicans who partnered with crude racist Dixiecrats, and by Democrats who promised but did not deliver. Black people were in a crisis. Anyone who suffers that kind of fate is likely to be in a crisis of despair. The threat of violence that was like a knife at the throat of the nation was averted because Black people, as they do so often, in the middle of their crisis, summoned up, as King notes, the genius that enabled them to perceive and capture the appropriate weapons to carve out their destiny. The weapon was nonviolence. But the nation did not repay the generosity. As a basketball coach said recently of Black people, we keep loving this country, and the country refuses to love us back. In Dr. King's words, for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, the two major successes of the movement, the practical cost of change for the nation up to this point has been cheap. The limited reforms have been obtained at bargain prices. The real cost lies ahead. The stiffening of white resistance is a recognition of that fact. The true cost of change is still to be paid. So Dr. King's prophetic voice still warns us. Legitimate discontent will not pass without freedom and equality, and revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. The state of Black America is different from what it was 50 years ago. But the bright day of justice is yet to appear. Indeed, with mass incarceration replacing segregation, and with COVID-19 devastation and ongoing political killings, Black life continues to be in jeopardy across the nation and the world. In the United States, right now, the entire democracy is under strain with the threat of violence. Even as I speak, there are more than 25,000 National Guards deployed to Washington, D.C. to protect the Capitol. And across the 50 states, similar scenes are unfolding of military-style security to protect state capitals. Those in law enforcement report that there are grave threats to the functioning of the government and the safety of the nation. And those threats are from within. The invasion of the capital by those promoting fear, white supremacy, mob rule, and their right to the reins of political power against the will of a majority of the people was 11 days ago. The inauguration of Joe Biden as president at this same capital, beginning a new administration, including Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president, a black woman with immigrant parents from India and Jamaica, and with a platform promoting a vision of inclusive multiracial democracy, is 3 days away. As we grapple with the fear and dread of this moment, and as we seek to come up with words and with ways to make sense of the moment, Martin Luther King Jr.'s words and language will help us in our efforts to move forward. Whether we like it or not, we are indeed caught in the inescapable network of mutuality. We are tied in a single garment of destiny. The need for change is evident, and we need to deliver it now. The fact that we even have this upcoming inauguration as an immediate political ray of hope is due in no small part to the organizing work of important coalitions across the country and the fidelity of the black vote. But special attention must be paid to black women. Black women show that change is possible. And I will read for you a list of the names of leading black women who have demonstrated for years that change can be brought by black people organizing across lines of difference. So here goes. Learn these names and say them with respect and honor them with dignity. Toni Morrison, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, Kimberly Crenshaw, Michelle Alexander. And then when we think about the more activists and those involved in electoral politics, I begin first with the forerunners: Diane Nash, Dorothy Cotton, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Septima Clark, Barbara Jordan, Shirley Chisholm, and then I move into our age: Michelle Obama, Alisa Garza, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, Latasha Brown, co-founder with Cliff Albright of Black Voters Matter, and Stacey Abrams, founder of Fair Fight. These last two women have been identified by some as the women who, laboring in the South, saved American democracy. We should mark the example of these black women, organizing in coalition with Native American, Asian American, white activists, and recent immigrant groups, enlisting, empowering, and mobilizing people across all divisions. Suspended in time, as we all are, between January 6th, a moment of American infamy, and January 20, a moment of American possibilities, we, the people who for years dared to believe that with organizing and consistent long-term work, we could create political change with an agenda promoting our multiracial democracy, marked by economic reform to reverse the widening immoral wealth gaps between rich and poor, expanded access to health care, extending the lives of poor and working class people, transforming our education to remove the vestiges of settler colonialism and white supremacy, paying critical attention to climate change and environmental degradation, and creating a new and more humane approach to immigration and to the resettling of refugees, and paying attention to issues of social inequity related to the rights of Native people, the rights of LGBTQ1A+ people, and the rights of working people to organize and advance their shared interests. Electoral reforms, and the removal of big money from politics, and the protection of the right to vote. Radical change in policing, in incarceration, and in criminal justice for the achievement of equal justice for all. We, the people who survived the pandemic of 2020 that killed over 2 million people worldwide, 400,000 in the United States alone, 200,000 in Brazil, 100,000 in India, and 100,000 in Mexico. A majority of them poor and black and brown people, tied as we are in this single garment of destiny. Even as COVID-19 has shortened our overall life expectancy in the US by a year and by 2 years among Black and Latino populations. We who, encouraged by the creation of new vaccines, dared to hope that 2021 would be a better year. We, the people who advanced and embraced the call for a new world of racial reckoning and for the end of anti-Black racism with our message that Black Lives Matter. We who dare to continue to believe that a new world is possible and that racism can and should be eliminated. We, the people, yes, all of us, caught in this inescapable network of mutuality, we must now regroup to ponder once more our lives, to find each other across difference, to forge new ways to advance the common good of all people across all social, political, geographic, and other divisions, not only in the United States, but across the world as well. We must take stock of the life of our planet, the life of our world, the life of our nations. In the absence of answers, in the lack of words, we begin with questions. How do we make meaning? How do we make sense of all of this? What did we just experience? What lies ahead for us? Who are we as a people? What will we tell our children? These are questions we must ask ourselves in our own languages and in our own different communities across the world. In this moment of chaos, in the midst of the pandemic and the threat of violence, we are faced with the stark realities of social confusion, political division, the failure of moral and religious leadership, and the failure of our systems of education. In this time when it feels like we're in the fog of war, when so much is unclear, there are some things we must affirm. We must affirm the reality that though ours is a time of existential fear and dread, dominated by uncertainties, one thing is clear. Whoever we are, whatever our politics, our religion, our education, our social standing, our economic state, we must find a way to move forward from this moment. As difficult as it is, how we move forward and the stories we tell about this moment, about ourselves and about the United States, will determine our relationship to the nation, how we live with the rest of the world, and perhaps most important, how we live with one another in community. With those affirmations, let's agree. We must work across difference to bring about this change. We must honor one another. We must mobilize our communities. We must be willing to work hard. We must be willing to work together. We must walk together. We must pray together. We, in this inescapable network of mutuality, we must live together. God bless you.
Thank you so much for joining us online today for Redeeming the Prophetic Vision. I'm Mike Yoder, Executive Director at Associated Ministries. We at Associated Ministries are honored to once again partner with the conversation to support this important event. One thing we help with is managing the funds that enable this gathering to happen. In case you didn't know it, this is an all-volunteer organized community event. And while none of the organizers receive compensation, we do believe it is essential to offer honorariums to today's speakers and creative participants. These are individuals who are sharing their time and talents to inspire you. We also support the organizations and the movements that our participants represent, and we provide recognition to our social justice honorees. So I have no hesitation in asking you now to consider making a contribution to sustain this effort. Every gift of any size will help assure that the prophetic vision of Dr. King will continue to inspire our community through this important gathering. To give, please visit the website shown on your screen or use the QR code on your screen to go directly to the donation page. The donation website will also be listed at the end of today's service as well. So thank you in advance for your generosity.
For when people get caught up with that which is right and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. I've been to the mountaintop. Speech, April 3rd, 1968.
On behalf of The Conversation, Associated Ministries, and we at Urban Grace, we are so thankful that you joined us this year for the 15th annual Redeeming the Prophetic Vision Interfaith Service. We missed getting to see you in person, and we look forward to when we can meet together again. We close today's service with a benediction from Reverend Howard Thurman. Reverend Thurman mentored Dr. King, as well as many other leaders of the civil rights movement. His seminal book, Jesus and the Disinherited, taught that the gospel should be read as a manual of resistance for the poor and disenfranchised. His work shaped a generation of leaders to not only endure their oppression, but to resist and even transform their oppressors. For those of us in the Christian tradition, we just celebrated the season of Christmas, which is one of the most festive and joyous occasions of the year. But Thurman reminds us that we should not be satisfied with sentiments of peace, because the real work of peace and justice lies ahead. So as we close our service and are sent out, hear now Reverend Howard Thurman's poem, The Work of Christmas. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, then the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among all peoples, to make music in the heart. Go in peace, seeking justice and liberation for all. Amen.
Everybody